Bubba Around Tree Outdoors. We're getting ready to do the hunt. I think they're gonna hunt both sides same time. Well, howdy. This is Capt Buster of Bubba Around Tree Outdoors with another teachable moment. This one's a little different from the ones I've been bringing. This, I would say this is for the kids, for the young people. The Lord gave this to me for, I was teaching a class out at church back February of '78. I was teaching a Sunday school class. I think the kids was 12 to 14 years old. And my daughter, Sherry, she's the one that wanted me to bring this story. She said it had just meant so much to her. You know, she never has forgot this story. It's a little long, and it's mainly for the young people, but it can be for anybody that hears it. Because people, this is about somebody that was different from the crowd. You know, we're in a very dangerous time in our country. We've got the Constitution being shredded, being canceled. Our freedom of speech is being canceled because we're saying what they don't want to hear, what they don't believe. They don't believe what you're saying. They're trying to cancel the Second Amendment because it's a hindrance to them taking over our country. They're trying to cancel Christians because they don't believe like they do. We're different. And this is what this story brings out is it's about a little boy named Johnny that was different. Okay, there was a small church that had a small youth group in one of the Midwestern states. This was a very religious church. The small youth group was very religious. They all did things in their very, very proper way, and they were a very, very close-knit group. There was a new family that moved into the neighborhood, and the first thing they did was started going to this church. They moved their membership, and in this family was a boy about the same age as the other children, but he was a very different type of boy. He was very, very small. He had a small frame, and he just didn't seem to fit in, and his name was Johnny. Johnny tried to fit in, but he was the type of person that wasn't very outgoing. It was hard to get to know him. He was real quiet, and he did something that was very strange. He read a lot. He really enjoyed reading. All the young people gave him the cold shoulder. They would not include him in the things that they did. If Johnny ever made a suggestion, well, they just laugh at him. They paid him absolutely no attention. The strangest thing about this boy was the thing that he kept saying. He kept saying, you know, the Lord sent me here for a special reason. I don't know what it is yet, but he sent me here for a special reason. When Johnny would tell them this, they would all mock him and laugh at him, but it didn't really seem to bother him. Johnny would just smile and go on about his business. Now, when Johnny and his family moved in, it was very cold. It was right during the coldest months of the year in the wintertime. After they moved, though, the time passed swiftly, and they had an early spring. All of a sudden, the weather turned real warm, and the flowers and the trees were wanting to bud and breathe the warmth of the springtime. The children that had been cooped up for long winter months were straining to get outside and enjoy the beauty of the outdoors and stretch their muscles in long denied outdoor activity. So they had a meeting. They said, we're going to go for a hike in the mountains. Johnny spoke up and asked, don't you reckon it's still a little too early to be making a hike in the mountains? They all laughed at him and said, no, it's warm and it will be a nice hike. So they planned to hike for the next weekend. They said, what we do is this, we're going to leave early Saturday morning and we'll hike for several miles. Then we'll stop and eat lunch. Then we'll hike back and we'll enjoy the day. They told their parents the location where they would leave from. They would park their cars at the end of an old road and leave from there. When we get to where the paths fork, we're going to take the West Mountain Range. That's where we're going to go hiking. The plans were okayed by their parents, so they went about their arrangements for their hiking trip. Early Saturday morning, they all gathered at the church. They drove to the designated area and they parked the cars exactly where they told their parents they would. As they got out of their cars, Johnny noticed that everyone was dressed very lightly, for the weather was warm. The wind was coming out of the southwest, and it was a very warm wind. As they were getting ready to leave, Johnny said, "Just a minute." And he walked around the car and got out a backpack. He was about to put it on when they began to laugh at him. They said, "Don't put that thing back." Said, "Put that thing back in the car. You don't need that. There's no need for you to carry a backpack. It will only weigh you down, and we don't want to have to help you carry it. You just leave that thing here." Johnny didn't want to leave it, but he did. Then they started out hiking the couple of miles that it took to get to the forks of the mountain ranges. One path went down the West Mountain Range, and one path went down the east side. When they all got to the forks, one of the boys says, "Look, instead of going down the Western Range, let's go down the Eastern. It's tougher. Let's see if we can hike the Eastern Trail." Johnny asked him, "Do you think we should do that? We told our parents we were going down the Western Range." They just laughed and said, "Come on, we'll take care of you, little boy. You don't have anything to worry about." So they took the Eastern Trail. After they had hiked for several miles, they began to get a little tired. Anyway, it was time for lunch, so they just lay around on the rocks and enjoyed themselves while they ate their lunch. By the time they had finished lunch, Johnny began to notice that the wind had changed and had eased around toward the northeast. Pretty soon it was coming directly out of the northeast. Johnny knew that a north or a northeast wind was a cold, cold wind. Then the temperature began to drop, and it began to drop very, very fast. Gray, heavy clouds began to hang over the mountains. They said, "We better go, and we better go in a hurry." So they began gathering and packing their things, but before they could leave, it had already begun to snow. Before too long, a blizzard had blown in, a late winter blizzard. They couldn't see where to walk, and they were getting terribly, terribly cold. As they walked along, they came upon a cave, and there, at least here was some shelter from the snow and the wind. Without shelter, there was no way that they could make it. It was a small cave, but it was a shelter from the howling wind. The cave had a small opening, but after they got in it, it opened up like a room. When they all got inside, they were so cold, they said, "Let's start a fire." They began looking, but no one had any matches. They said, "You mean nobody has any matches?" Johnny said, "I had some in my backpack, but you made me leave it back at the car." They all huddled together there in this little cave, trying to stay warm. All night, the only warmth they had was each other, so they stayed in their huddle. By morning, the blizzard had lost none of its fury, and it was still raging as it had been the night before. As they were trying to figure out something to do, they heard a rumbling and a roaring and felt the ground shaking. Before they knew what had happened, a snowslide had covered the entrance of the cave, so there was no way out. Some of the girls started crying. The boys didn't know what to do, and all of them were scared except little Johnny. One of the girls had a radio, and Johnny said, "Turn on the radio and let's see what is on the news." So she turned it on, and they heard the news. The voice on the radio was telling about a church group that had become snowbound in the mountains. The voice continued. They didn't think they had anything to worry about, though, because they had several helicopters and several search parties out searching the western mountains. Then they all started crying again. "We're not on the western mountains. We're on the eastern mountains." Some of them began to panic, but Johnny didn't panic. He began to walk around and look. He said, "I believe I can get through that crack." They said, "No, that's much too small. You can't get through there." Johnny said, "Yes, I believe I can. I'm going to try to get up through there. If I can, I'll go find the road, and sooner or later someone will come. When they do, I'll bring them back here." But they asked him, "How are you going to find the road?" Johnny reached into his pocket and pulled out a compass. He said, "I brought my compass, and I know how to read it. When I get outside, I'm not going to follow the trail. I'm going to take a compass bearing, and I'm going to cut straight across. I know I'll find the road somewhere if I cut straight across." So they helped little Johnny up through the crack. He wiggled and he squirmed until he finally made it all the way through. He was the only one that could do it because he was so small. Because Johnny had always read a lot, he knew the very first thing to do when he got out was to look around and find a landmark, something that he could tell the searchers to look for. Right overhead was a tall, pointed rock way up into the air. He said to himself, "Boy, that's a good marker. I'll remember that." So Johnny took his compass bearing and he cut straight across the valley. The snow was very deep and the walking was very hard. Little Johnny could only go a short distance and he would fall. And he began to get very, very tired. Every time that he would fall, something inside of him would say, "Why don't you stay down here? Why don't you go to sleep? It would be much easier." But Johnny knew better. He knew that if he lay down for a very long time, that he would go to sleep. It would be a sleep from which he would never wake up. He forced himself back up. Time after time, he would keep walking. Soon his legs was bleeding. He could not see the rocks that were beneath the snow, so he would fall over the rocks and into the snow. The pain was terrible, but in the back of his mind, egging him on, was the fact that he had to make it to the road. He would say over and over to himself, "I've got to make that road. I've got to make that road." Step after step all day long, Johnny would fall and get back up again. He would fall and get back up. He was cold and bleeding and very, very tired. Late that evening, Johnny fell into the road. He didn't even see it until he fell into it. As he fell, he saw where there had been traffic on the road, so he knew that it was probably the search parties that were riding the road. He also knew that he couldn't sit down and wait. He knew how tired he was and just how easy it would be for him to go to sleep. Also, he knew that if he waited for someone to come by, that he would never be able to tell them where the others were. So although he was so tired and in so much pain, he kept walking. But Johnny had just used up all of his strength of his little body, and he fell for the last time. He simply could not get back up again. Shortly after he fell, a jeep came along with 4 men and saw Johnny lying in the road. They jumped out and wrapped him in a blanket. They could tell from the way that he looked that it was very doubtful that he would make it. After a while, Johnny opened his eyes and told them, "Before you take me anywhere, I took a direct compass bearing, walked straight down the valley. They're on the eastern range, not the western range. Walk until you see a tall, sharp, pointed rock, and right below that rock is a cave entrance that is covered with snow. They're in that cave." They carried Johnny to the hospital just as fast as they could, but by the time they got there, it was too late. For Johnny had given his all. He had given all that he had to give. Johnny had given his own life for the others in the cave and the mountain. He loved them, but his love wasn't returned. The young people were found exactly where Johnny said they would be. When all of them got back and found out that Johnny had died, they were all crying. When they went to the funeral, they all stood around and talked about how much they loved him, but it was too late. Johnny couldn't hear them. His family told them, "Don't worry about little Johnny. Where he is, it's warm. Where he is, he's not a little boy anymore. He's strong. Where he is now, everybody loves him." Could you love someone like little Johnny? If given the chance right now, would you tell him how much you love him and appreciate him? If little Johnny could walk in right now, would you tell him how much you love him? Would you want to be his friend? Sure you would, for you've already heard the story, right? Little Johnny never hurt anyone. All he ever did was help people. He gave the greatest gift that he could give. He gave his life. Now let me tell you about another little story. He wants to be your friend. He too's been rejected, and he too has been laughed at and put down by people just like you. You know, all he ever did was good, while he was even better than Johnny. One day he too was called on to suffer. His father called on him, and it was hard. It was very hard. It was so hard, in fact, that this man asked his father if there was another way that his will could be fulfilled. He says, "Not my will, but yours be done, my father." He suffered. Oh, how he suffered. He was mocked. He was spit upon. He was beaten. A crown of thorns was even forced on his head. He was made to carry a cross that was much, much too heavy for him. While he carried this cross to the top of a hill, he was then made to lie this cross down while they drove spikes through his hands. The pain was terrible. Then they drove spikes through his feet. Can you even imagine the horrible pain? Then they stood the cross up and slid it into a hole, and when the cross slammed in the ground with a thud, that jarred his whole body and tore his flesh where the spikes held him. Think about the anguish and suffering after hanging on the cross for a few hours. Think about the cramped muscles in his shoulders and chest, gasping for breath as the bones strained to tear from their socket. Ask yourself this question: how could he love anyone enough to suffer like this? He fought back the pain, and he held back tears until he just couldn't stand it anymore. Then he too cried out. He says, "Father, why have you forsaken me?" You know, he completed his mission for which he was sent. Right after he drew his last breath, the earth started shaking, and the veil in the temple was torn in half so that he could speak directly to God. He conquered death so that we too could conquer death. He's gone to his Father, and he said, "I've gone to my Father so I can prepare a place for him." So I ask this question: can you love him? Do you love him? This man called Jesus. One day it's going to be too late to say, "I love you, Jesus." So when you sing a song, lift up your hands and praise him. Or when you begin to sing a song and you lift up and praise him, but you won't lift up your hands because you say somebody will laugh at you, this causes him pain. When you hurt another person, you're hurting someone that he loves very, very much. Whenever you love someone so much, whenever they feel pain, you feel pain. Let's cause him joy. Let's worship and learn because of wanting to, not having to. Treat others and love them as we would have them to treat us. In this we show the love of Jesus. When we sing songs, lift up our hands to him, and this causes him much joy. When we say, "I love you," let's mean it. This causes him joy. Make public professions of your love for him. This costs something. Live your everyday lives for him. Do you love someone like little Johnny? Show it. Do you love somebody like Jesus? Show him. And that's the story of little Johnny.